This episode of the CreaseCast is brought to you by Manscaped. For 20% off and free worldwide shipping, go to manscaped.com and use the code CREASE20. That's CREASE 20 at manscaped.com.
This is the CreaseCast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Friday edition of the CreaseCast. And I actually can say Friday today because generally Friday episodes go up on Saturday. Because usually our recording is at like 5 in the night or whatever. Normally the Canucks don't play a lot of Friday night games. So we do it then. But we're doing it a little early today, so this is probably actually going to get out to you before the game against the Washington Capitals today. And we got a great guest today. Joining me, he's a writer who's been covering the Canucks since 2010 through articles, videos, and great song parody songs. He's admittedly a personal hero of mine as somebody who's read his work for years. Absolutely one of my all-time favorites. And he has an album coming out in next week, I believe, the Neverknown album. Mr. It To Bulis himself, Daniel Wagner. Daniel, how are you?
I'm doing well. Like, oh, you're gonna make me blush. Just far too much praise.
That's what we do. We have to talk up everybody big who comes on the show because like you gotta give them a reason to come back at the very least, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm feeling embarrassed now. I have to leave.
Oh man, oh jeez, oh no, that's mark. Yeah, mark that down as another person who walks out or who walks out midway through. Yeah. So we're gonna talk a little bit about your album later on and everything. But there's actually a good amount of hockey news to talk about right out of the gate. I was initially planning to just more or less start with the Canucks beat the Habs, which is good, but also it's the Habs who've done as badly as they've done this year. But there's actually like some pretty recent news that you've already wrote about. The Canucks signed Arshdeep Bains to an entry-level contract. I'm thinking of elite prospects because that's where I pulled up the link from. That's where I pulled up the stats from.
As do we all.
As do we all. God, like we have the same three sites. It's Elite Prospects, Hockey Reference, Hockey TB, Cap Friendly. 4. That's it.
Yeah, cap friendly. And then I've got my advanced stats, my natural stat trick, my hockey viz.
That's right.
Evolving hockey. You got to have those as well.
Right. I have natural stat trick. I recently just got Jay Fresh's cards on Patreon. Those are really good. Those are God, especially for someone like me whose best grade in math was a C in business math in grade 12. Those are very helpful. Those player cards are a blessing. Arshdeep Bains, he's a Surrey, BC native. He's currently tied for first in WHL scoring with 30 goals, 52 assists. And normally, like, this isn't necessarily the hugest deal in the world, but this is actually kind of an important signing because it's the first one of Patrik Allvin's. Patrik Allvin's is the GM of the Canucks. Obviously, there was the one Ashton Sautner contract that Jim Rutherford signed before he got here, but this is the real one. This is the real one. So, Daniel, like, what does this signing tell you about like the Canucks going forward, how they plan on doing business, how Patrik Allvin plans on doing things, and how they're marketing themselves to players and potential free agents?
Well, it's interesting. It's not just his first like signing, it's his first move, period. Like everything else that he's done has been like guys down to the minors, up from the minors. Like there hasn't really been any move at all. They haven't made any trades, they haven't done anything. So this is the first thing that we can kind of judge Patrik Allvin on. And I mean, it's a pretty great signing. You're talking about a kid who is leading the WHL in scoring, with the one caveat that he is 21 years old. So like some of the kids that he's playing against are like 4 years younger than he is. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind when you look at his numbers. But he's an interesting player. He's got a ton of skill. He's got really great edge work on his skating. Like if you watch some of his highlights, he pulls out the spinorama just seemingly at will. He's just very quick on his edges to turn and lose checks. There are questions about his top end speed and those kind of things. That's often the case with undrafted free agents. They have flaws. But what's interesting to me is like you're taking this guy who's leading the WHL in scoring and you're adding him to your prospect pool. That's just, another lottery ticket that gives the Canucks a chance to have better depth. And he's not just, a typical undrafted free agent is sometimes a guy who you can see as maybe he'll be a fourth liner someday, but Bains has some serious skill. Like he can make really good passes. He's got really creative energy in how he plays. He's got a lot of pace to his game. So he's fun to watch, and he's a player that maybe there's that small potential that he could be something more than just a depth player. He could actually be a bit more of an impact player. Now, that possibility is always low with undrafted free agents, but it's still exciting to see the Canucks add a player like this to their prospect pool. And it shows that the Canucks do have some good selling points here. They can sell themselves to free agents going, look, we are on the right path. There will be an opportunity for you to make this team in the future, and you will have the opportunity to be on a good team. It also helps, that he's from Surrey. So,
Yeah.
it's maybe a little bit easier to sell yourself to a player when, you have that personal connection there.
Absolutely, but and even though you say that as well, but like as even with the Canucks for as like how much they struggled over the last few years, even it was sometimes pretty hard even to get like BC guys to come play for the Canucks. Sometimes like Troy Stetcher's obviously the big one who did come and play, and we miss him dearly. But and then you go into the whole like the Canucks under like the last regime, they didn't get a lot of overagers that were at least not it at least otherwise not through the draft, more so through the draft than they did in like free agent signings. There was Zach McEwen, who's gone on to do some decent stuff with the Flyers now. Apparently, he's having a decent year there. But yeah, like it is nice to see that they can actually like sell to the guy who's for leading the whole junior WHL league in scoring right now is like I don't think something that the last regime could have done. And what's more, I think that one of the things that obviously was really important in like those dregs of December when we were talking about how it's time to make that management change. One of the things that was important about that was they needed to do it as soon as possible because the quicker you get that done, the sooner you can get on to fixing things and making business decisions like this and getting into those things. If you hire a new guy not until like after the season's over, then suddenly all those free agents are probably already gone. Some of those NCAA guys have already signed. You lose that extra amount of time and wiggle room like you got with the trade deadline coming up as well. And it looks like if this is the kind of thing that they can get done, if this is the kind of tidy business that they can get done here in the next like couple months, already like going into next year, things look like the cupboard looks a lot less empty than it did before.
Yeah, I mean, there's the potential for them to make some moves in these coming weeks. Like, obviously, there's the trade deadline coming up. They can potentially add prospects or draft picks, and because one of the things that it has been kind of undersold a little bit is how empty the prospect cupboards really are for the Canucks. A lot of their best young players made the jump directly to the NHL, and it's great that the Canucks have this nice base of young players under 25, guys like Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes. Like, you've got that, but where's the rest of the depth coming from? Their top prospect is Jack Rathbone, who, as much as I like him as a prospect, he's still a bit of a question mark. Is he going to be an impact NHL player? We have no idea. And so they don't really have a lot of surefire NHLers in their prospect pool. So that's going to be a major challenge for this group, and making that change to the management group early on so they can work to address that over time. Like giving them this time that they've had over the past couple months to evaluate where the team is at, where the prospect pool is at. Now, hopefully, we'll start to see more moves to address some of the weaknesses within the organization. And maybe Bains is one of those. They're adding some extra skilled depth to their forward group that they didn't necessarily have among their prospects. They don't really have that kind of creative playmaking, scoring winger in their prospect pool that really uh, has a chance to make the NHL and make an impact. So who knows? Arshdeep Bains might turn out to be nothing. He might just be a decent AHL player. He might not even be that. We don't know. It's really hard to tell with overage junior players. A guy who's already turned 21 this year. Maybe it's just he's having a good year because he's older than the other players, and that's all there is to it. But you watch him play and you see that creativity and some of the things that he can do on the ice. It makes you wonder if there's more there that he could actually become an impact player. And the Canucks need to have more of that type of player in their prospect pool because they need that depth. They need to have young players coming up as they're starting to age out some of the other older players that they might trade away or might just leave in free agency or whatever else it is. In the coming years, they're going to need more young, cost-controlled players stepping into the lineup behind the likes of Pettersson and Hughes and Höglander and Podkolzin. Like, they can't just depend on older players. And I mean, they still have a lot of weaknesses within the organizational depth. Their right-hand defenseman, their depth is just atrocious when it comes to right-handed defensemen. Even left-handed defensemen, they don't have a lot of depth there, but they have good NHL players at that level and a good prospect in Rathbone. But there's still a lot of gaps that this management group needs to fill. And hopefully, with the amount of time that they've spent evaluating and not doing any moves at all, they'll have they'll have an accurate view of what they need to do and hopefully can do it.
Yeah, that sounds like such a oh, they haven't made any moves at all. They could have, but they didn't. But like, no, that's totally accurate. Like, yeah, that's a totally accurate thing where it's like, yeah, they have the being patient is really important at the right times. And sometimes, we've seen it before where they use patience in where management uses patience in a weird way where they're like, oh, this guy we drafted sixth overall, he's not doing so good, but we're gonna give him a $2 million contract anyway and see how that goes. And that turned out badly for a lot of reasons, but. Yeah, like you mentioned the whole the amount of guys that have actually graduated from the system here. Like Cody and I have talked about it at length before about how the Utica Comets, you go down the list of when they were there, that there's not a lot of guys who were not outside of the first round pick guys that played a handful of games that actually ended up graduating to the big club and playing becoming key contributors there. And you look, and aside from the goaltending was always pretty solid. They did a pretty good job at graduating guys, but skating wise, not much there. And God, the move to Abbotsford has to be a really big help there. We talked about recruiting before. You can now tell a guy hey, you're a guy from Surrey. Hey, even if you're not on the big club, you're gonna get to play in Abbotsford. You're gonna get to play pretty close to home. That in itself is a good selling point, being closer to your prospects and actually being able to evaluate them on a more regular basis. That's the kind of stuff that is going to help so much. And I know, and Jim Rutherford and Patrik Allvin know that better than anybody, because I mean, Pittsburgh was the king of getting the most random guys out of nowhere, the Mark Donkin, Buzz Flibbits, that would just randomly show up and all of a sudden, oh, hey, look, they're a 30 goal scorer all of a sudden. They have that resume of being able to do those kinds of things and bringing in those depth pieces and who develop through their own system. And the Canucks need that maybe more than anything at this point. Right defense is looking very suspect.
Well, their development over the last several years has been a major issue. They haven't really graduated anyone from the AHL to the NHL. And the players that have gone from the Utica Comets to the NHL aren't playing for the Canucks. It's just, there's not a lot of development there. And that's the major piece that's been missing. It's you can draft as well as you want, but if you're not developing your prospects, they're not going anywhere. And we've seen them take steps to address this. They've hired a dedicated skating coach in Mackenzie Braid, who comes highly recommended, working with his mother, a pretty well-known skating coach for a lot of NHL players, Don Braid. And so they've been taking these steps. I know that Mackenzie Braid worked a lot with their prospects even before he was officially hired. I know he worked with Jonah Gadjevich and helped him progress his skating, and now he's playing off and on in the NHL, but again, not for the Canucks. And so, like, you've got this major issue of not being able to develop prospects that they have to address, that and they've shown kind of a vote of confidence in Ryan Johnson and believing that, he is doing the right things. And if you talk to Ryan Johnson, he says all the right things when it comes to prospect development. Um, it just hasn't really happened yet. And like, the Canucks need to have more guys who can just gradually grow in the system and not have to make the jump directly to the NHL, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get these third round draft picks, fourth round draft picks, anybody beyond that, getting them to the NHL unless they're coming through the NCAA route or maybe playing in the SHL. And that's kind of what we've seen. Adam Gaudette was an example of a player who developed in college hockey before coming to the Canucks. So they need to address their AHL development. I think they have been focused on that even before this management group changed. They were making some good moves to address that aspect of things. But if they aren't bringing in guys who can maybe even step into the lineup alongside someone like Elias Pettersson in a few years, a guy like, that's what the Penguins did. They had guys who were stepping in and just immediately playing with Sidney Crosby and immediately working, immediately finding success. And it helps that Sidney Crosby is Sidney Crosby. But if you've got guys like Elias Pettersson and whoever else among their young core that they keep, or their old core, you need to be able to bring in these young wingers, young forwards to step in alongside them and have success, because otherwise you're going to be capped out and not making any progression.
Yeah, and that in itself is why the upcoming, like, the trade deadline and everything is so crucial, because you might be able to get fish a couple of those guys out of there who could come and make that impact down the line for you. Some guys are going to be more NHL ready than others, especially depending on who we're talking about trading here. But that's where they're at. They just need they need to bring in some of those, like, younger guys with a little bit more, like, a little bit more controllable years on their contracts, that they can work with them and develop them and even give that opportunity. Yeah, in Abbotsford and within the AHL system that they just couldn't do before, when you're literally 3 time zones away and you're not able to even go check on what's going on a regular basis. In terms of, like, the trade deadline, I mean, we had the game the other day, the 5-3 win over Montreal. A bit of a weird game, but overall, the players who are most on the trade block right now, or at least a lot of those guys, happen to step up, which begs the question: should we just be threatening to trade everybody? Like, should that just be part of the gig? Like, is that why Juho Lammikko went off for such a long time? Is just because we were like, oh, well, he's going to be gone at the end of the year, right? Or he's going to be like, he's going to be going somewhere, and then all of a sudden he's Wayne Gretzky, like that. Like, hey, that might be the real secret here.
I mean, there's always these complaints that, oh, it's a distraction. Canucks Twitter is a problem. It'll keep players from coming. Maybe it's actually a motivating factor. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe if we hadn't been talking about JT Miller trade rumors, he would just be a run of the mill second line forward. But because we keep talking about him, suddenly he's going off. No, like, I don't know. Here's the thing. Here's the thing with the trade deadline: the Canucks might not do anything, and that's not the worst thing. Past trade deadlines, maybe that has been an issue where the Canucks have failed to make trades and it's cost them because players have left in free agency. But that's not really an issue with this trade deadline. The only unrestricted free agent that they have to worry about is Tyler Mott. And, if that's the one player that you're worried about, that's not that big a deal. As much as I like Tyler Mott, he's just a bottom 6 forward. You can find other bottom 6 forwards if he leaves in free agency. There's a chance that they re-sign him. That could be problematic depending on the cap hit that he ends up getting. But again, that's not a huge issue. That's the only player that you have to worry about leaving in free agency. Then you're not really worried at all. The Canucks can afford to just walk away from any trade talks that they want to at this trade deadline, because if the deal isn't good enough, they can wait. They can make a deal at the draft. They can make a deal in the off season when maybe some teams have a little bit more cap flexibility. Maybe there's teams who are interested in acquiring some of the players that the Canucks have that wouldn't be interested right now because they're not Stanley Cup contenders this season. There might be a bigger market in the offseason. Who knows? And you could even wait until next trade deadline, at which point maybe there is a bit more pressure to make moves because a guy like JT Miller will be on an expiring contract. But that's really the Canucks' biggest advantage heading into this trade deadline, that if anyone wants any of their players, they're going to have to pay, because the Canucks can just say, well, we just won't make any deal at all. If it's not the right deal, we don't have to make any deal. So that's a real advantage for this management group. In negotiations, they can just threaten to walk away at any point. And really, if they don't make any trades, okay, maybe the team does make the playoffs this year. Who knows? That was completely outside of the realm of possibility a few months ago. Now it's completely possible. Maybe it's not probable. They still have some games to make up. They've got some tough teams ahead of them in the standings. They've been on a pretty impressive tear, and maybe that hot streak will, maybe they'll falter, but they haven't yet. If you look at their record over recent weeks, like, they haven't lost 2 games in a row at all. Like, they'll have one terrible game. Yeah, they'll have one terrible game, like truly terrible, and then they'll bounce back the next game and be just fine. So it'll be really interesting to watch. They've got a tough schedule coming up after the trade deadline, but even in this homestand, there's a couple tough games coming up. Even that game against the Canadiens, as much as you look at the Montreal Canadiens and you go, okay, they're at the bottom of the NHL standings. They're terrible. I mean, they, under their new coach, Martin St. Louis, they had won 7 of their last 8 games heading into that game against Vancouver. Yeah. Like, that wasn't necessarily a terrible team. They were on a hot streak, and the Canucks handled them pretty well. As much as it was a bit of a weird game, they won, and they keep winning. So maybe they go into the trade deadline and they're still in the playoff hunt, and they just go, no, let's keep this group together and just see what happens. And they can afford to do that because all of their trade targets, all of their players that have the most value on the trade market, they all are under team control beyond this year. So they have lots of flexibility in how they deal with this. They can wait to make moves in the offseason, and that's okay. They can afford to be patient.
Yeah, it's such a benefit to have that time on your side and everything. Like, I mean, with the JT Miller conversation obviously being the big one for a lot of people, and including, like, I've talked about it at length, where I'm like, I really do think that, hey, 11th hour, you might see someone like New York come in with a ridiculous overpayment offer, or they're just like so desperate to make the playoffs that you can't say no, kind of thing. But yeah, overall, you can 100% like afford to wait at the same time, like, look at the Pacific Division right now, and particularly the couple teams in front of them. I honestly, I think I said this like back in January, I think there's a very real possibility that even if the Canucks decided we're gonna sell, I don't know, all the JT Miller, Conor Garland, everybody, like, have a bunch of your best players, they could honestly still like fall backwards into a playoff spot because the teams behind that teams on top of them are tripping over themselves to finish behind Vancouver.
Yeah, I mean,
Edmonton has been awful. Yeah.
The tough aspect with that, though, is that there is the mental component. Like, as soon as you take players out of that room, especially good players that are leaders, like a guy like JT Miller, it'll have a mental influence on that room. It'll tell the group, like, look, we're looking at the future. We're not looking at the short term. We're not looking at making the playoffs this season. And that will affect the players. And the other thing to keep in mind, too, is we talked about their forward depth. It's not great beyond what they have on the roster already. And so, it's not like you're calling up a top prospect to take JT Miller's place, to step into the lineup and maybe be a catalyst, a spark for the group, because you've got this young, exciting player coming into the lineup. Like, who are they going to call up? I mean, who do they have? Are they going to call up Sheldon Dries or Sheldon Rempel?
Tyler Myers is a forward. That's
put Tyler Myers at forward and call up Guillaume Brisebois. Like, like what are you going to do? Like, that's the that's the one aspect is if they do sell at the trade deadline, it is sending a message to the room that this is what we're focused on. We're focused on building for the future. And that can be exciting because it tells the group that, hey, we've got a plan. There is a vision for the future. We see the team not just sneaking into the playoffs, but being a Stanley Cup contender in a few years' time. But in the short term, it's going to hurt the room. It's going to be tough for those players who have missed the playoffs for so many years. You look at a guy like Bo Horvat, who has spent so many years with the Canucks not making the playoffs. The one time he does make the playoffs, he shows that he's that type of big game performer. And he was that in junior too. Like, he was a guy who always stepped up for those big games. He was great in the playoffs in junior. He was great in the playoffs for the Canucks in the bubble. But you can't just keep taking that player and going, we don't need the playoffs this year. It hurts. It can't feel
Oh
good
God,
for
yeah.
him at all. Now, if they do falter through the rest of this homestand and the playoffs start to slip out of reach, maybe the mental component becomes, look, that's okay. We're going to be a great team next year because of this deal, this deal, this deal, these players that are going to be coming in. That is something that they could potentially sell to the team if the team starts to slip away. But geez, you look at, like, maybe it's not the Edmonton Oilers that they have to look at, because the Edmonton Oilers are also still pushing for that one of those last wild card spots. They're in the same position as the Canucks right now. Maybe it's the Vegas Golden Knights.
Oh God, yeah. They
They've been
very well could.
atrocious.
Yeah, they look terrible. I even have it here in like my notes. Like, not only like Riley Smith's injured now, Robin Lehner
Robin Lehner,
apparently
yep.
is on crutches. Apparently, they're in trouble. Like the Knights are that team. Like when they like, I wonder. Do you think they're gonna look back? Like, do you think they're gonna look back on the decision of, instead of trading anybody, to bring in Jack Eichel, that putting Mark Stone on LTIR was the wrong call for them? Because like, I don't know how injured he particularly was. He was clearly playing before Jack Eichel came back, and he did play in the All-Star game before then. But like, oh my God, there's no way for them to get out of this right now with the room that they have. They're kind of stuck.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Eichel could still get back up to speed and carry them to the playoffs all on his own pretty much. I mean, he wasn't able to do that in Buffalo, but you look at that team around him in
Yeah,
Buffalo and it's hard to blame him.
little
Um
different.
yeah, a little bit different. But Mark Stone is just such an important player for that team. Like, he is one of the best two-way players in the game. And so as soon as you take him out of the lineup, you're hurting their puck possession game. And, a lot of players, they're often playing hurt. They're playing through something that a doctor would probably tell them, no, stop playing, you
Stop.
idiot.
Yeah, you're crazy. Why are you doing this?
Why are you still on the ice? Take a couple weeks or a couple months and get back to 100%. Like, there are a lot of players out there who are like that. They're not playing at 100%. And so, like, I don't see anything fishy about them putting Mark Stone on LTIR. Like, he probably was dealing with something that rest would help. I mean, you look at a guy like, I see the poster behind you, Roberto Luongo. He
Yeah.
played like for years on hips that had no business being on the ice. Like, and the amount of preparation that he had to do every day, hours of preparation just to take the ice for practice, then hours more preparation to take the ice for games. And he was good, like, he would still be able to play, but like, a doctor would definitely look at him and go, no, you idiot, stop playing hockey. Just
Yeah.
stop. So like, I don't think there's anything fishy there necessarily with Mark Stone, but he is such an important player to that team that, yeah, it's probably had an impact, especially with Jack Eichel, still getting back up to speed.
Yeah, and especially considering that, like, with the where they're at right now, let's say they instead, like, let's say even if let's say Stone still goes on LTIR, but they maybe move somebody else, or they maybe move somebody else like before Eichel comes in to try and recoup some assets, you might have a few extra pieces at your disposal than you would right now, than you would in particular right now, especially sold high on, like, I don't know, maybe like a guy like Marchessault, like Jonathan Marchessault, who's hasn't been as good as he had in like years past. Interestingly, after the Vancouver series, they really broke that team, didn't they? Thatcher Demko just single-handedly destroyed a couple of those guys.
Just ruined their confidence for years.
God, yeah. Like, I mean, William Karlsson has, I mean, that's partially just due to going from being on the Golden Misfits team of like that lightning in a bottle team to being now, okay, now you're line 2. Okay, now you're line 3. Like, that just comes with the territory of playing in the NHL. I did like the watching part of the night Sabres game yesterday. You mentioned earlier, you talked about we joked about Canucks Twitter and and how people are always like, oh, it's so terrible around here. There were 2 different cases last night where there was like the whole Eichel thing where he shows Buffalo, they boo him, which I don't know about you. That rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, where I'm like, oh, you're booing a guy. Let me check my notes here. The team wouldn't let him get a surgery he needed. Wow, what an awful human being. What a terrible.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough as a fan because like you're looking at a guy like Jack Eichel who was supposed to be like the savior of the franchise. And then not only does he not save the franchise, he leaves. You know, to a certain extent, I can understand fans being like a little upset, not being too happy, but it's like that anger is misdirected. Like it's not Jack Eichel's fault that team has been terrible for so many years, and it's not his fault that he left because he wanted a surgery that they wouldn't let him get. Like, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's super ridiculous. And then there's like there was the other one. I don't watch a lot of like, I mean, look, I'm a one sport guy. I watch hockey pretty much exclusively, but I did see the video on Twitter yesterday of Ben Simmons going to his first game in Philadelphia as a Brooklyn Net, and there literally being a crowd of people outside the team bus booing him, like I think at the hotel or something. Like, it was something ridiculous. There was like there was FU Simmons chants at the game. Now, Philly fans are just a whole other thing. Yeah. Like, they're something completely different. Like,
didn't they throw batteries at Santa Claus once, I believe?
They did, that's right. And that was like a football game or something.
Yeah.
They're a whole look, like the reason Gritty is such a perfect mascot for the Flyers is because literally everyone there is just Gritty, just not in a costume. Like that, they're just all bring that vibe. It works so perfectly. But like, whenever I see stuff like that, I'm always like, no, the Canucks fans you're doing just fine. If the worst thing you do is just tweet a little bit, get a little bit too upset at players, you're doing okay. Like,
yeah. I mean, like there is stuff like I think most of Canucks Twitter is just, people venting online, and it's not a big deal. The stuff that crosses the line is when you start seeing people threatening dogs like lives on like Instagram comments and things. Like,
I haven't seen that, thankfully. Ugh.
Yeah, like sometimes there are some gross things that happen because we're in this age where players are more accessible than ever. People will send horrible Instagram DMs or at people unnecessarily on Twitter when they're criticizing them, and it's like, don't do that.
Yeah,
like,
I saw Bo Horvat liking all the tweets from one guy and adding him on Twitter. I'm like, okay, that's a captain. That's a good captain.
But like, not everyone can do that. Like, not everyone has that mentality. Like, there's some people who probably just, some hockey players just should stay entirely off social media, because when you're a public figure, you're going to get criticized no matter what. And, some people, they have a tougher time with that than others, and then there's people who just kind of embrace it and just kind of thrive under it. Like, I hate to bring up Brad Marchand, but he seems to be just fine with people criticizing him online, or rather, not just fine, but he gives back as good as he gets.
Yeah.
So like, I think that there's an element where, Canucks Twitter does cross the line sometimes, but it's not in like the criticism that people tweet online. It's when people unnecessarily bring like players' accounts into it and say horrible things on Instagram DMs or in Instagram comments. Like, that's where it crosses the line for me.
Absolutely. I mean, I fully agree with you on that. And I think the thing is, like, people think that Canucks Twitter is like particularly bad about that stuff. In reality, I think that's just true of anything that has a big fan base. You're gonna see toxic, like you're gonna see a group of people that are toxic, and they're usually the loud minority. Like I've heard about the BTS army before. There's some interesting individuals in there. And then you like even like God, like I follow Star Wars. Like God, that place is a shit show sometimes. Like, you know as well as I do.
Yes.
Sometimes Marvel and Star Wars people take things a little too seriously. It's shocking.
Well, it's like, people will take how someone performs, like what if it's in hockey, how someone performs on the ice and suddenly make personal judgments on who they are as a person based on that. Or they see someone who plays a character that they don't like in Star Wars and they go, well, must be a horrible person. How dare you ruin this thing that I love? And it's like, look, they're doing the best they can. And it's not usually their fault if they have a bad script in Star Wars or they have a bad coach or bad development system in hockey. Like, it's usually not the player's fault. Players who have bad contracts, it's not their fault that they have a bad contract. It's not Tyler Myers' fault that he's paid too much.
Yeah, God.
Like, he is who he is, and you take him as he comes, and you can go like, okay, I don't think he's a great player, or you go, I think maybe he should be in a different role on the team. Maybe he should be a forward, or maybe he should be
Borderline
a
wing.
third defenseman. I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, but you can't blame the player for their contract. You can't blame a player for their situation that they're being put in. You can criticize how they perform in the role that they're given, but you shouldn't make personal judgments about them based on that.
Support for the CreaseCast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped recently launched the Ultimate Men's Hygiene Bundle, the Performance Package. Join over 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you, CreaseCast listeners. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code CREASE20 at manscaped.com. If my math is correct, that's about 8 million balls. I am somebody who is going to school right now for media and broadcast training, and that includes looking your best, particularly up here in the face and shoulder area. But at the end of the day, personal hygiene goes far beyond just that, and Manscaped is really going to help with that. Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0 comes with not only the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, their Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance Boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. It also comes with this lovely Weed Whacker ear, hair, and nose trimmer, which is great for things like being on camera. The Weed Whacker is also waterproof and provides proprietary skin-safe technology, which can help reduce nicks, snags, and tugs in those delicate nose holes. It's time to take care of yourself, so go to manscaped.com and get 20% off and free shipping with the code CREASE20. That's CREASE20 for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times on the show, like I obviously Tyler Myers is one of the guys that I probably give the hardest time to, just as a goaltender and watching him and knowing fully well that he would be the teammate that like the defenseman that would give me just fits all the time. But like at the end of the day, it's not his job to say no when someone offers him money and offers him a contract that is worth more than him. It's not on him to go, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not worth that much. I should take less. Like, no, you should take the money. Absolutely take the money and do your thing, man. And that is like, but at the same time, I don't know if you heard, but Conor Garland makes too much money. I don't know if you heard that.
That's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard.
Incredible. Like that. Okay. I commented.
You're talking about the guy who he leads. Like, I don't mean to cut you off, but he leads the Canucks in 5-on-5 goal scoring and points. He has more 5-on-5 points than JT Miller does this season. Like, he's not paid. He's paid just fine for how he performs. Like, especially right now, like with how he's playing with Elias Pettersson and Niels Höglander. Like, he's a top 6 forward. He's a top 6 winger. Like, he is playing the way he should. He's being paid the right amount for how he plays. Trying to argue that he is somehow overpaid is one of the most absurd things that I've seen recently on NHL Twitter.
Absolutely. Like that 100%. I commented on it. Like that 100% what is some executive going, like doing the whole, oh my God, he's terrible. We better take him off your hands. You're lucky we got here just in time with the perfect amount of cap space to
It's like,
facilitate a trade.
oh, I hear you're looking to clear cap space. Well, here's the player who's causing all the problems for you, right? It's Conor Garland that's causing all these cap space problems, right?
Who is this? Conor Garland? I've
It's like
never heard of him
I
before.
guess we'll take him, maybe.
But only because we're friends. You owe me big next time. Like that, like God, like that 100% was somebody trying to get the Canucks to like give away Conor Garland for nothing, which is like, oh God, no, he's been fantastic. Like even at the point, there was the point in the year where he's like, oh, when you're struggling, like, and I think he was talking about like himself to I think at the time he was like, oh, you're struggling to score points or something. Like it's hard on you, and I'm like, what are you talking about? You've been great. Like you're doing a great job right now. Like there was no point this season where I've been like, even like when he's had like maybe points in time where he hasn't been scoring at the same clip. You're still like, oh, like there's never a point where you're like, oh, Conor Garland is playing terribly, or makes like an awful giveaway. He's usually like, he's one of the most reliable guys at every time he steps on the ice. And like and there was like the comment recently, I think too, with Bruce Boudreau, where he talking about putting Pettersson with Höglander and Garland. And he like something along the lines where he was like third line, like he's like, oh, I know I could put him with third line guys because he's that good. And I was like, wait, what? Did you just call Conor Garland and Nils Höglander third line players? Like, I know he doesn't particularly love Höglander, but
Well,
Garland.
I think that
okay, love is the.
I think that quote might have been in reference to the time though when he ended up with Tyler Mott and Alex Chason on his line.
Oh, was that? Okay.
I believe that was like there was a game where he started the game with I think it was Höglander and Chason. And then Höglander and Mott switched places, and so he was playing with Mott and Chason in that game. So I don't think that quote was in reference to Garland and Höglander.
I hope not.
But
I could be totally wrong on that. You're right. But like, God, yeah. Hopefully not, because Garland's a nice guy. Like he's played on the third line a couple times. He's been dropped down there a few times. Like there have been like points where he was playing with Jason Dickinson, and I guess it would have been at the time.
Who?
Colson when he
sorry,
was still.
That's mean to Jason Dickinson. I'm sorry.
Oh my God! Talk about like I wrote an article a couple weeks back about like I feel so bad for Jason Dickinson in the sense of just like I don't think he's a bad hockey player by any stretch. It's literally just it could not have been a worse fit, and I don't know if anyone could have seen that coming into the year. Maybe a little bit just because of he's only played for one team that's been pretty decent defensively and had that going for them for years. Like
he's been fine defensively. It's just he provides absolutely nothing offensively. That's the biggest issue with him is that, if they were bringing him in to be the third line center, and if you're going to be a third line center, you can't just be one dimensional, especially in the modern NHL. It was the Brandon Sutter issue where like Brandon Sutter was a guy who could provide some defense, absolutely kill penalties, but didn't do all that much offensively in terms of pushing puck possession. But the benefit of Brandon Sutter is that he could occasionally pop in some goals on the rush. He was good offensively in transition. And so Jason Dickinson doesn't even have that going for him. So he's fine defensively, but just when you're not providing anything at all offensively, you can't be on the ice that much. It just doesn't work. And the other big issue for him too is that he doesn't win faceoffs. And as much as I don't think faceoffs are that important, coaches absolutely do. And so coaches are not going to trust you on the penalty kill. They're not going to trust you for defensive zone faceoffs if you're not going to win the faceoff to start with. And that was an issue before he was signed. Like that was something we knew about Jason Dickinson, is that he's not good on faceoffs. And so if that was the role that you're going to bring him in to be a go-to penalty killer, to be a shutdown third line center, I mean, that was an issue before you signed him. That was something that they perhaps should have seen coming.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, like you feel bad, especially because like they have like a guy like Tyler Mott who's playing fourth line minute, like on your fourth line center, generally speaking, and like he can do both of those things already. And you're kind of like, well, like maybe he's not more than a top, like a third line guy on a good like on a good hockey team. He's probably still in that fourth line role. But yeah, with Dickinson in particular, it was a case of like they got starved for scoring a lot quicker than they thought they were going to. And suddenly, the guy who can't score, and also did not do very well in the PK either, which is where they started putting him, hoping that would work for a bit. It hasn't worked. That hasn't worked very well. It's yeah, like it just all of a sudden like that looks very glaring. And I think
I
sometimes
wanted him to be good. I wanted
me
him to be good.
too,
I
me
like him
too.
as a person. He's great to talk to. Like he stood up for some social causes. Like in the bubble, he was one of the guys who was immediately on the side of the guys who were standing up for Black Lives Matter. Like he's just a really nice guy, quality human being. And I think he's an okay hockey player, just in the wrong role. And like I mentioned that earlier, you can't like hate a player who's being put into the wrong role or being paid too much or things that are not under his control. And it doesn't help as well that obviously Brandon Sutter has been out for the entire season dealing with long COVID. You know, that's a guy who could have been the team's fourth line center and maybe swapped places with Dickinson and been the third line center at times. And maybe Dickinson could have been better on the wing, on the third line or fourth line. And instead, they had to bring in a guy like Juho Lammikko, who is fine. And he's been, pretty good lately, especially like he suddenly found an offensive gear that I didn't know he had.
I don't think
I don't think he knew he had it
no,
either.
no, he didn't.
No one knew that this guy could actually score some goals. And so, that's been kind of a bonus. But when you're bringing in a guy like Dickinson and expecting him to play a certain role and then he can't play that role, like that really hurts the structure of the team as a whole. And that's why one of the big reasons why the penalty kill has struggled so much is they don't have guys to fill those roles. And that was something I talked to Travis Green about many, many times, was like, hey, why are you not using these top six forwards on the penalty kill? And he was always very adamant that he wanted everybody to play a role. And he saw like guys like Pettersson to be their power play guys. They're guys that you don't put on the penalty kill because we've got these other guys who can play on the penalty kill. We've got Beagle and Sutter and Mott and Roussel and all these guys. But then you get rid of a bunch of those guys and don't bring in reliable replacements on the penalty kill. You have to do something else. And one of the things that we've seen that has been successful is putting Pettersson on the penalty kill, putting Quinn Hughes on the penalty kill. They've been good in those roles because, of course, they've been good in those roles. They are talented, intelligent hockey players who can adapt to whatever situation you put them into. And so, like, that's the real issue with Dickinson, is that he's being asked to play a role that he's just not quite the right fit for.
Yeah, and then even when it started to look like he was playing maybe a little bit better, he got hurt, which just threw a whole other wrench in there. Yeah, like I mean, there were points like we talked about I talked about it on the last show with Chris Faber. Like we talked about like why isn't Vasily Podkolzin gotten time on the PK? He's decent in his own end. He could be like and you know why a little bit. Like Bruce Boudreau definitely is leaning more on the veteran guys a little bit. He's definitely given more trust in recent weeks to guys like Podkolzin. Like Podkolzin's playing regular minutes with like the top six guys, and it's been good for him because he's a genuine talent. He's almost had a quietly good year even by like general Canuck rookie standards. It's been pretty good. It's a very like it's not a Calder trophy candidate year by any stretch, like especially when you see what like Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider are doing. And I guess we'll throw Michael Bunting in there too.
As old as he is, that's okay. Yeah.
He's older than me. Like he's older than I am. And I'm the same age as Besser. Like I'm the same age as Brock Besser, who's been on the team for 4 years. Like, okay, I guess he's a rookie by the loosest term possible, but fair enough. But yeah, like it's been a good year for Podkolzin. I would like to see him on the PK a little bit more. I'd like to see those young guys get more of those opportunities. Like again, like you're already last in the NHL in penalty killing. What's the worst that could possibly happen to, like, how could it get any worse?
Yeah, and like you look at how they've improved the penalty kill under Boudreau. The splits are are
Clearly
pretty good,
different. Yeah.
but even under Boudreau, they've been a bottom 10 in the NHL penalty kill. They still haven't been a good penalty kill. They've just not been the absolute worst all time in NHL history, like they were before the coaching change.
Yeah.
So, like, even now, when you look at how they've improved as a penalty kill, there's still a lot of room for improvement. And I don't think they should shy away from trying some other players. But right now, I think they like what they've seen from the pairing of Pedersen and Horvat. I don't think Horvat is a great penalty killer, but maybe with Pedersen, that duo can do well. Pedersen has been really good at cutting off pucks in the neutral zone, preventing zone entries in the first place, and then not having to worry about that in zone defense on the penalty kill, which is where Horvat has really struggled in past years. But if you're putting them together and you're really kind of putting the onus on them to be aggressive at the blue line and prevent those zone entries, I think Horvat and Pedersen together are pretty good at that. And so, like, that's a pairing that is interesting. And then you've got Lamico and Mott, and you've got those guys who have kind of found a groove as well on the penalty kill. And so maybe there's not room for, put Colson or maybe even Niels Hoglander to step onto the penalty kill right now. They're really trying to figure out if what they have right now is going to work long term.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, like they're making so many long-term decisions in such a short period of time. Like, I mean, this set, like, in this that first game against the Canadians at like a 7-game homestand, like literally the day before the trade deadline, is such a huge factor into what happens then, what happens on Monday. Like, they might make some decisions before then, and it sounds like they already have kind of an idea of where they're going with everything at the very least, even if that might be nowhere, that might be one trade. I will say, like, with like Tyler Mott in particular, do you worry at all? Like, let's say Tyler Mott is still here on after trade deadline day, like, because of they say, okay, we're going for the playoffs. We know we might lose him in UFA. But we're going for the playoffs. Does it worry you at all with the management team if that, like, their first big decision is something like that, where they stand pat, particularly with a guy like a UFA who's due to make a lot more money that they probably can't afford?
It doesn't concern me that much because, like, as much as you might be able to get a decent prospect or draft pick in return for Tyler Mott, it's not a make or break thing. Like, it's not like a deal that if they don't make it, it ruins the franchise.
Right.
Like, obviously there are much bigger fish to fry. Like, whether or not they make a JT Miller trade is going to have a much larger influence. And I think they can still kind of make up for not moving a guy like Tyler Mott or maybe a guy like Tanner Pearson. You know, some of those moves around the fringes that they could make but might not. Like, you can make up for some of that in free agency by going to Europe or the NCAA, or as we've seen, uh, juniors, trying to get some undrafted free agents to kind of fill those gaps that maybe some of those trades for second and third round picks might otherwise do. So, I mean, they're in a tough spot here where the Canucks are not good enough to be a cup contender, but with a guy like Thatcher Demko in net and some of the offensive firepower that they have available to them, they can get hot and maybe make the playoffs. So they're in this kind of in between place where it's a little uncomfortable, but they can, like I said earlier, they can afford to ride it out and make some of their big decisions in the off season. So they can let the season play out and not have to worry too much if the worst thing that happens is that they lose Tyler Mott to free agency.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that's a it's a with the issue. A lot of people obviously with like the issues with asset management in the past. Like, that's what I think a lot for, like, me personally. I know that's why I'm worried, because I've seen it, like, how many times they've lost so many guys before. But, like, yeah, it's not a huge loss if that's the only guy, out of the group that you end up, like, saying, well, yeah, he moved on, he got a way better offer that we just couldn't afford, and it wasn't, like, the smart decision for us to add another fourth liner at the $4 million. Like,
And they could make a decision in the offseason too that, we believe that this guy is a third line forward and that he is important to our group. They could re-sign him and make cap space in other ways. Now, I would prefer that they look to find like the next Tyler Mott, the next guy who's going to be a quality penalty killer, be able to play with some speed and pace in your bottom six for like a league minimum deal or an entry level contract on a prospect. Like that's what I would prefer. But if they decide like, no, we think Tyler Mott is important to our group, I'm not going to hate that decision because I like Tyler Mott. I think he's a quality player, and I think that especially as they look to kind of fix the penalty kill, he's a quality penalty killer. He's probably the only legitimate penalty kill specialist that they've got on the team. And so I wouldn't hate it if they re-signed him and looked to make cap space in other ways. That would require some bold moves elsewhere, but I think they're going to have to make some bold moves anyways.
Yeah, you're gonna have to make at least one tough decision over this offseason. Like one decision that might at the time look a little bit like, oh, could be like it looks like a huge gamble, but it's just kind of one of those things you have to do when you're in the cap situation that you're in. And I mean, there's obviously the Halak contract comes into play a little bit with the bonuses for next year and everything. I mean, it doesn't look like Halak is going anywhere. Particularly, I don't know whether that's due to his stats or okay, no, it's his stats. It's his stats. That's the only.
Well, I mean, he also has a full no movement clause, which in hindsight, still have trouble wrapping my head around. I remember when it was initially signed, I like the no movement clause was like one of the last things announced. And so when I looked at the contract when it was initially signed up, I'm like, okay, there's some cleverness here, getting him on a contract that is cheap right now, fits under the cap. Maybe he'll have some bonus money that goes onto next year's cap, but at least they could potentially trade him if that comes up. And then the no movement clause was announced, and it was just like, what?
Yeah.
you're giving a guy in his late 30s a backup goaltender on a 1-year contract. You're giving him a no movement clause? That is unheard of. Like I still can't wrap my head around it. I know Jim Benning is gone. It's not like he's not the GM anymore. It's beating a dead horse, but it's like that's still, you look at some of the contracts that he signed that, like, I mean, that is one of the most baffling. Obviously, like there's the Louis Eriksson one where it was specifically designed to be buyout proof. Like that kind of blows the mind as well. It's like it's not enough that you're giving this guy who's heading into his 30s a long-term contract for $6 million a year. You also made it so that you can't buy it out in the future. Yeah, just a lot of head shaking decisions when it comes to contracts over the last several years.
Yeah, God, the flashbacks I'm getting to like years where like with like Jay Beagle, Antoine Roussel, and Tim Schaller, and me thinking at the time, well, the Tim Schaller contract might do okay. That was also incorrect. Look, I don't know how he managed to make a 1-year contract so bad, because I looked at it even when I saw the no move clause. I was like, oh, it's a 1-year deal. How bad could it possibly go? And then sure enough, like, I don't know what happened. Like, obviously it's been talked about before that with Halak, like he's a guy that needs reps. You need to get him more reps than they've gotten him this year. And in a way, I think the putting a bonus that was contingent on him playing starts, having a certain number of starts, might have made things a little bit more hairy in that regard, just because of oh God, like, hey coach, you got to remember we have to pay this guy but extra money if you start him too much, which for a goaltender like him who gets better as games go on, as he plays more, is a problem. And now,
he's a smaller goaltender, like who depends on his reads to make saves. Like, and if you're not in game situations, if you're not playing, you're gonna have a tough time making those reads. And I think he's a good goaltender still, as much as he's struggled in his last couple of starts. I think he was very good to start the year and just didn't get any goal support.
Yeah. It was easily, like there were like, I went to I think it would have been his second game with the Canucks. It was the 2-1 loss to the Flyers. And like that, right at that point where the Canucks could not have been worse, like playing worse. And you're just looking like, you have the 2 goals at the beginning. It's like they have all the time in the world to come back. And you're looking at Halak, like who did a great job for the rest of the game. He had the one bad goal, I think, like a minute in. After that, he was just fine, and you feel really bad for him. And then you see games like recently where Thatcher Demko's supposed to get the night off, and all of a sudden he has to come in and play cleanup duty because Halak has a hard night. And again, that's partially due to, what happens when you have a team that's so reliant on your starting goaltender to win games that you don't know how to play when you don't have the guy making 5 alarm stops every single time in front of you. But and with Halak, up until recently, I would have said, well, I think he's kind of that ship has kind of sailed. The one thing, and we talked about Vegas already today. Like, the one reason that maybe you're still in a possibility where you could move a goaltender, and that's a huge if because of how many good goaltenders there are available, is there are a few teams right now that very suddenly are desperate for goaltending help in any way, shape, or form. Faber mentioned Washington as an option recently because Samsonov, I think, was injured, or they had one, or Vanacek, one of the two was out on injured. They might be. I think they're both back now. I think they're both back at this point. But there was also, like, Toronto just lost Jack Campbell, who has not been doing well of late, but up until January was one of the better goalies in the league. Do you see any scenario where they somehow managed to offload that contract, or is it just kind of as is? We're just gonna have to live with it.
Well, I think they're just going to have to live with it. Like, there's two issues. One is that Halak has struggled, and scouts see that, teams see that. They can't just overlook that. It's there, and especially with a guy who's older, they're going to have questions over whether he can bounce back from it or if this is just who he is now. And then you've got the no movement clause that apparently Halak has no interest in waiving whatsoever. And so they're stuck. And I remember, like, asking Jim Benning about that bonus structure and, whether he was worried about having all that dead money on the cap, because Braden Holtby's buyout also hits the cap pretty hard next season. So they're going to be paying a lot of money to two goaltenders to not play for them. And his answer was that he wasn't worried about it because the Roberto Luongo cap recapture would be coming off of the cap. And so that's how he looked at it. He looked at their salary cap and went, well, we're getting this money off so we can replace it with other dead money. And it's like, have you considered not having any dead money?
Yeah.
No? Is that not a possibility?
Weren't you blaming the Luongo cap recapture penalty on why you couldn't ice a better team like months before?
Yeah. So it was very short-sighted, but it was kind of that's how that management group functioned. They were looking at the current season, whether they could make a push for the playoffs right then and there, and we'll worry about the consequences later. Because who cares? We're trying to make the playoffs now. And that was especially true heading into this season, which is why it was probably time to make that management change well before this season started. So, like, before this past off season, so that those decisions wouldn't be made with such a short-sighted view. You're talking about a GM who desperately needed to make the playoffs this season or he was in trouble. And so that was how he functioned. That's why he made the moves that he did. If there was a different management group in place ahead of time, probably wouldn't have made those same decisions. And, maybe there's some people out there who are pretty okay with that because they like the team that they've got right now, especially the team that has thrived under Bruce Boudreau. But I think long term, there's this roster is just so poorly constructed. You've got a roster that just has no team speed, that has a complete lack of depth on defense, especially on the right side, that doesn't really have a a top pairing defenseman on the right side. Just they don't have one.
No.
They're playing Luke Shen.
Have a partner. Like, he should have a set partner by this point.
You're playing Luke Shen as essentially a top pairing defenseman with Quinn Hughes, and Luke Shen is fine. I like Luke Shen.
Everybody loves Luke Shen.
Everybody loves Luke Shen, but he's not a top pairing defenseman at all. There's no way that you could say that. So they've got this lack of team speed, the lack of depth on defense, no top pairing defenseman on the right side. They've got no penalty killers beyond Tyler Mott, and maybe they can find a penalty killer in Elias Pettersson. He can be that Pavel Datsyuk type who can play in any situation. I think he can, but like, you need more penalty killers than that. They don't really have penalty killers on defense. Like, I don't think Travis Hamonic is a particularly good penalty killer. I don't think Oliver Ekman-Larsson is even a particularly good penalty killer. And those are kind of the go-to guys that you've had. Like Hamonic and Myers and Ekman-Larsson, like these are your penalty killing defensemen. Uh, like I have major
rough.
issues with that.
Yeah.
Like this last game, actually, Quinn Hughes played way more on the penalty kill than Ekman-Larsson, and I think it was the right decision. Like Quinn Hughes was the go-to guy on left defense on the penalty kill. Like he started a couple of those penalty kills. Ekman-Larsson played less than a minute on the penalty kill, and it was like, that's the right decision. As much as Ekman-Larsson has been pretty good this season, like not offensively, which is what you're hoping from a guy that you're paying that much money, but he's been like that shutdown pairing guy with Myers. He hasn't been particularly good on the penalty kill. So there's these just huge flaws in how this roster is constructed, and they can overcome those flaws based on how JT Miller has played offensively. Their forwards have been able to score some goals, and the power play has come through, and Thatcher Demko has played lights out. So you can overcome those flaws for a little while, but long term, they're going to keep the team from being a cup contender. And that should be the goal. And so they have to address those flaws. Maybe not at this trade deadline. Maybe it waits until the offseason, but they have to address them.
Yeah, we've seen it before in Vancouver with teams like I think the best example of like what happens if if you've checked off some of the boxes but not all of them, and especially some of the important ones, is like the West Coast Express era team. Like that team didn't have, like, as Dan Cloutier did his best for what he could. He was my first favorite goaltender, so I owe him that much. But like at the end of the day, he probably wasn't necessarily the right goaltender for the kind of game that they played. They didn't necessarily have the same kind of defensive depth that they did. They had some great ones. They had some really great players like Ed Jovanovski, who is criminally under talked about, I think, for what he did with the Canucks. Like, I'm honestly surprised he doesn't get talked about more. Like, he's not one of those guys that has like kind of like the same aura as like a Brendan Morrison does, like kind of thing, right? Because he was really good in Vancouver. There were just points where they just didn't have all of the boxes checked, and that's kind of why they got to a point where they won one playoff series in that era.
Even like just post West Coast Express era, like first year with Roberto Luongo, when he carried them that entire season, carried them in the playoffs, like, you know, they had nothing else other than Luongo. So it was like they checked off the goaltending, they checked off the goaltending box, and then they had some pop gun offense. The Sedins were starting to round into form, but like defensively, they were not where they needed to be. And so they had those gaps, those holes, and those flaws. And you saw when Mike Gillis came in, he addressed those specific flaws. He went out and got the players that they needed. Some of his judgments early on were not great. I don't think Darcy Hordachuk was necessarily a player that they needed. It seemed like he looked at the roster and went, okay, where are our needs? We need defense. We need this. We need that. We need a fighter. It's like, no, you didn't. You didn't really. You don't. You needed to address other issues first. And so,
Glass.
yeah, Tanner Glass. He fights bears. But like, you know, there's a hope here that Rutherford and Patrik Allvin, that they can kind of play that same role. Look at the strengths that the team has, look at the weaknesses, and address those specific weaknesses. You know, they need their Christian Ehrhoff trade, you know, like finding that one player that really makes a huge difference in a key area of need, you know, and if they can do that, then this team can probably turn things around pretty quickly. They've got enough young players to have this strong young core, but there are these flaws that if they can address them, they can become a very good team in a couple years' time.
Yeah, it is not like a complete teardown by any stretch. They've got a lot of clear, obvious, great stuff there. It's just the matter of finding the guy to like who can round everything out and finish the job. Like, and that was something that I said with Benning even was like he did a decent job. Like just because the guy does like a guy does a decent job setting the table, like sometimes somebody might need to still bring in the food, that kind of thing. Where it's like it's okay if the first guy who drafted the good player isn't the guy who finishes building the championship roster. Not every
And
GM is good at that.
I would say that the table's a little wobbly.
Yeah.
like
Yes,
like
one
Benning
leg
has
is definitely a little shorter than the other.
Yeah.
Is this apartment slanted? Like you just see the bowl like sliding down the table, like, oh no.
It's just some people have plates, some people have bowls, some people have like just a napkin in front of them. It's like
they're all different colors and from different different stores. Like wow,
I
that's a
don't
good
know. It's
example.
just like people look at Jim Benning and they go, "Oh, he was great at drafting." It's like, was he?
Was he though?
There's
Like, yeah,
two pretty clear misses in the top 10. Like
yeah.
blatant misses in the top 10. And like that's not an area where you can miss. Or if you are going to miss, man, you've got to have some big hits somewhere else. And he did have some hits. Like there were some good
goaltending he was good at. Like I would say the one, like I said before, I think the only thing that I would say he was 100% decent at was goaltending talent. Like they never had a bad goaltender while he was in charge. That's the one thing I think you can really say like clearly, but that's not good enough when you're trying to build a championship team.
Yeah, like I mean, Ryan Miller was, he was good here in Vancouver. Was it the right signing at the right time? Well, maybe not. That was one of those moves where it's like we want to make the playoffs now. Is it the right move long term? Well, who knows. But like that did allow Jacob Markstrom some time to develop, and he came in and was excellent. Obviously, Thatcher Demko was a great draft pick. But like, if you're not getting like great players outside of the first round, you can't afford to miss on top 10 picks. And, those are two very, very blatant misses.
Yeah, there have been very few people who have missed in like that on those kinds of whiffs. And like, the only other one that I can think of is the one where the Bruins had those three guys just go one after the other. Oh my God, they could get Shabbat, Kyle Connor, and Matthew Barzal. Oops, they drafted none. Oh well, they got Jake DeBrusk out of it, who they're also maybe trading, but we don't. Serves them right. Serves Boston right. I'm glad you brought up a little bit there. I'm glad you brought up the 06-07 year because that's a special year for I think both of us. Obviously, that was the year of Jan Bulis. And
Yeah.
God, like I have them. I think I have them sitting back there. Actually, you can't see them from the screen, but I got the pucks from.
Oh, the mini pucks.
The mini pucks. Yeah, I got every single one of them because I was still living in Vancouver at the time.
Let's see.
There we go.
I got my Jan
There it
Bulis.
is. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a gift from my friend Justin.
Oh, I believe that's friend of the show.
Friend of the show, Justin Morissette. Yeah.
I do believe so. It is,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I love God. Those are like I miss the. I'm sorry, like not to be like back in my day guy, but back in my day, there were some good like giveaways and promotions in the province and in like newspapers and stuff like that.
Man,
we don't do those anymore.
Remember when newspapers just had money they could throw around?
Don't as a guy in journalism school right now, don't remind me.
As a guy who used to write for the Vancouver Sun, yeah.
Oh, God, like yeah, tell me about it. It is like, but I mean, hey, look, the age of blogging is obviously a bigger deal, and you're like obviously you're one of the like the first guys in Vancouver who really made that a big thing. You and Harrison with Pass It To Bulis. For me, obviously, 06-07 was the year of Luongo joining the Canucks. Like a lot of like clear. I became a goaltender just because of that guy. Like that was my hero growing up. Like my hero for years. Eventually, we're gonna get him on this show. Eventually, I didn't get him as GM as like I wanted, but we'll get him on the show at some point. Just like in terms of like how much like the sports media landscape has changed in the time that since you started blogging to now, and like how much more like how different is it like in like how much has it changed for the better in your mind?
Well, it's definitely different. Like when Harrison and I first started it, it was a hobby. It was just something that we thought, hey, this might be fun. We wanted to write something together. We had talked about like, well, maybe we could write a play or something like, and then as we were talking about all these ideas of what we could write together, we were watching Canucks games constantly. So we just were like, hang on a second, we can just
The light bulb comes on. Yeah.
let's put those hands together. We'll write about the Canucks. And so like even the blogging landscape at the time was like we kind of looked at it and we went, we can fill a gap here. Like there's different blogs out there that do different things, but there's no one who's going to cover the team the way that we do, which is, try to provide some smart analysis, but also some smart ass jokes and just being kind of fun and silly and just kind of embracing kind of the absurdity of, obsessing over sports, because like there is something a little strange about, grown men and women and non-binary people obsessively following how other grown men shoot a puck around on the ice. Like this, there is something a little bit absurd about this, and it shouldn't necessarily be taken too seriously, but it should also be taken too seriously. Like,
Yeah.
so we kind of filled this gap here, and the way things changed, like we worked at it really hard. The 2010-11 season, we basically went, okay, we're going to do this now. We're going to write every single day. We're going to make sure there's new content on the blog every single day for readers. And it exploded. And of course, the Canucks were amazing that season. That didn't hurt. And so we were able to turn it into a job. But how we've seen it change is now bloggers are getting media access that just was not available when we were starting out. Like, even when we were hired by the Vancouver Sun and we were writing for a major newspaper, we couldn't get media access. We we very rarely were allowed to speak to the players. Usually, like, I managed to get a great interview with Ryan Kessler, one of my favorite things that I've ever done. Lost to the internet now, although you can find it on the Wayback Machine.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
the only reason I was able to talk to him and do this one-on-one interview is because he was doing a series of media interviews through a charity that he was working with. And so that was the only way that I was able to talk to a player at that time. Now you've got a whole bunch of bloggers are getting press passes, and because they're taking it seriously, they're treating it like professionals. Canucks Army, David Quadrelli. You've got the Daily Hive with Rob Williams. Like you've got these guys who are professional, serious writers. They, I think like early on NHL teams and especially the Canucks were a little worried about, having editorial oversight. Who do we talk to if your reporter does something egregious or says something that they shouldn't have, or, is rude or disrespectful in the room, whatever it is. They wanted to be able to go, okay, who do we talk to about this? And they had this idea that bloggers were irresponsible, that they didn't have any editorial oversight, that they would just come in and be disrespectful, rude, not follow the rules, whatever it is. And I think like it helped that I was eventually able to get a press pass, and there were other bloggers that did the same thing, and we were able to go, no, look, we're professional writers. I have a degree in communications. I studied journalism in university. Like, this is what I want to do as a career, as a job, and I'm going to treat it seriously. And we should be treated seriously as bloggers. We should be treated with respect, because this is the new media landscape. This is what it is now. Newspapers, it's not that they're dying out necessarily. It's just that they look a little different now. They're mostly online. And if they're mostly online, then these other startups, these other kind of upstart groups, maybe they can also gain the same relevancy and have the same level of respect from organizations like the Canucks as these major newspapers do. And so now you look at Press Row, there's not as many people there. It used to be that like the Province and the Vancouver Sun, like they would send 3 reporters to every game, like each. So that's 6 reporters from 2 newspapers, and then you would have a whole bunch of other reporters, like, and they would write, they would write a main article, they would write another column, and they would write sidebar pieces. They would have all this content going into the newspaper the next day. Now you go up there and they usually have one guy from the newspaper and he represents both. Maybe they'll have two, but that's it. And so then the rest of press row, you've got bloggers. You've got
Quads
you've
in
got
that
me.
black toque in that
Yeah. Yeah, you've got David Quadrelli and Chris Faber, and you've got Rob Williams, you've got me. Like, I'm forgetting people, and I'm sure they'll be very offended. Um,
the two that listen, I'm sure.
but it looks very different. But it's because we kind of earned our way there, and we've earned it by being respectful to the Canucks, but also showing that we're serious about it. We're not just there to be fans, and I think that was another major concern too, is that
Yeah.
a lot of blogs when they were starting up, they were fan sites. And so, you let a fan into the room, what is he going to do? Is he going to fanboy out, or like is he going to ask inappropriate questions? Like, and so, the landscape changed when I think the Canucks and other NHL teams as well saw that this new media could still be respected. The people in it could be professional and do their jobs well and not be an embarrassment going into the locker room. And especially, like, I think once it became clear that it's not just fan sites, it's not just like, not that there's anything wrong with fan sites. Like, that's how Pasadena really started, is like Harrison and I were fans. And now over time, it's not that it's not that I'm not a fan, but now it's my job. And it is a very different feel. So that's how things have really changed, is that the Canucks have seen that um, these websites, these blogs, we can be respectful and professional and get the same respect from the team that major newspapers get.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, like it's like there were like obviously the Botchford project in itself is like one of those things where it's like the fact like that they probably like who knows if that would have even been considered like as a thing like just on its own year like a few years back. Now that they're understand this idea of like, oh, we can bring in some young people, they're not going to like abuse the power of getting this opportunity, and they're going to put something together really great for the website. Like, I mean, we've seen like already we've seen like Jacob and Adam and Madeline, or I think Madeline's article hasn't come out yet, but they've got those coming through. I know like last year for me, like, I mean, just getting to be in the like hang out in the press area, not the same one as you guys have this year. But like literally, like getting to sit like for anyone who doesn't know, I think I mentioned it at the time. You were sitting right behind me, and I like that was like kind of the best part for me was getting to sit behind you and like Drance just making jokes the whole time, like having a good time. Like we're doing our job, but we're also just having fun doing it. And it's like this is like honestly like the life. It's the best way to it's the way to live in a way. Like it's exactly what you want to be doing. Like exactly what you want to be doing. It's awesome.
No, that Botchford project night was pretty special. It was pretty cool to see all three of you, Arash and like, oh my goodness, my brain just broke. Clarissa, of course, duh, who is amazing. Like,
who is just on a whole other level
yeah.
from all of us. Like
So like,
yeah.
it was super cool to meet all three of you and like get to know this younger generation coming up. I remember when David Quadrelli was first coming into the press box as well, like introducing myself to him and kind of like easing his nerves a little bit. And now he's there,
Now
and
he's my boss.
now he's your boss. There you go. Yeah, he's grown in a very quickly from where he started out. And so like that's been really cool to me. One of the things that I really appreciated when I started with Vancouver Is Awesome is that I was able to get a freelancer budget and bring in some young writers to write for Pasadena. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of threw that for a loop. I was actually temporarily laid off as well, and so the budget isn't exactly there yet for that. But that was one of the really cool things that I was able to do. That was an opportunity that I didn't have when I was starting out. I didn't have a chance to have my work seen by a larger audience. I just, because we were on Blogspot and we just had to kind of work our own way in. We kind of had to make our own opportunity. And it has been rewarding to see young writers get a larger opportunity. At the same time, like the media landscape has shifted a bit where there's a little bit less opportunity to kind of make your own way.
Yeah.
The days of independent blogs are almost over. Like,
Yeah.
like that there's less chance of doing what Harrison and I did, which was start our own blog and get that blog by itself to a level where we would get attention from uh, the Canucks or the attention from the Vancouver Sun, and get an opportunity the way we did. Most people are not getting their sports news by going on blogs these days. They'll go to The Athletic, or they'll have their Facebook feed, or they'll have their Twitter feed, and they'll just go to these sources that they already know. So like there's this shifting landscape where like these young writers are getting opportunities in different ways, but there's also less opportunities to kind of make your own way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally. I mean, yeah, like I never like I started Lock in the Crease obviously like back in 2015, like, and I never intended on ever make. I knew that that was never going to be a full-time job. Like I would never be able to just do that solely. I knew it was very much going to be a, well, if I keep just do the reps there, maybe someone will see it, like my work, and will maybe offer me something with their site or something like that. It's not like you can't make as much of a name for yourself because there's already so many people like you doing that same thing as well. But like, yeah, like there are, and like even like stuff like, oh God, I could spend an hour talking about the whole the way that media and sports media, especially in Canada, has really like shrunk down to like, oh, it's like, I mean, as well as I do, it's two companies. For a while it was two companies anyway, running everything, all the major like most of the major outlets, and then a random chicken company owning some of that too. But yeah, like, and then up until recent, and now you're seeing in a way like kind of a weird renaissance with like specifically with like sports radio and stuff like that, where like now they're kind of getting their own independent companies are kind of stepping in to like fill in a gap that was clearly missing, and like that's still to come for like TV, like for TV stuff, and
Yeah.
for other, and for even for print to a degree, like, but
And there's opportunities in podcasting as well. Obviously, we're on a podcast right now, but like
yeah,
I think too, I've been very happy with what Vancouver is Awesome has been able to do, what I've been
yes,
able to do with them. The parent company Glacier Media has like um, has a bunch of like local newspapers. They're kind of in a way kind of saving the local newspaper, helping them transition to online, and helping them kind of keep their audience and build an audience online that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to have. And so like a lot of local newspapers that might have died, I think Glacier Media has helped them a lot. And so now like I'm able to do Canucks coverage for this organization that isn't owned by Post Media. It's, independent from that. It's not The Athletic. It's not these major groups. And The Athletic is now the New York Times. So like
they're the Wordle Athletic now.
yes. So like I still really appreciate kind of still being independent, still being kind of my own thing. And I'm actually really grateful that to be able to do that under kind of the Glacier Media kind of group, because it is kind of building something that's independent from the Post Media empire, which is kind of fun. We're the rebels,
Yeah, we're
we're
the
the rebels. I
absolute.
mean, still a big corporation. Let's not like
But that's tomato. Like, it's very different. I mean, yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned like how the difference between like covering hockey just as like a part-time pastime thing, and like and when it becomes a job, because I mean, I knew that going in, like that would probably be something for me that would happen. Like it definitely changes your perspective on how you view sports, um for if any like young media kids are listening, like, yeah, if you want to be in hockey writing, or any particular writing beat that you enjoy, once it becomes a job, it definitely changes like a little bit of how you see that. So it becomes important to like start to develop hobbies and enjoyments outside of hockey
well,
in a way.
and I will say this. I think I know where you're going, but I will say like one of the pieces of advice that I give to young writers is that you have to love writing more than the thing that you're writing about. Um, because like if you don't love writing and you want to become a hockey writer, once it becomes a job, you might not like hockey as much as you used to. Like, I still like hockey. I still like the Canucks. I would love to see them be successful, win a Stanley Cup. I want that to happen. Part of me is still that kid, 10 years old, watching the 94 Canucks go to the Stanley Cup final and watching that puck hit the post. Part of me is still that kid. But I'm also, a professional writer. This is my job. And if I didn't love writing as much as I do, it would be really hard. And
Oh
so like
God, yeah.
I'll see this sometimes where it's like young people who are wanting to become either journalists, or they're wanting to get into radio or whatever else it is, who I'll get people who they don't seem to like writing that much, but they like hockey and they want to cover hockey. They want to do that. And it's like, well, you got to develop that love of writing, because if you don't love writing, you're not going to be able to put the work in to get better at writing and become the best writer that you can be. So like that's the one thing that I'll say, like, learn to love writing, learn to love the craft of writing, because if you don't, you won't be able to keep going when you kind of maybe lose a bit of that love for the thing that you're writing about.
Yeah, like God, there are, you look, yeah, like God, like imagine if you didn't like writing, it would have been like so hard to cover the Canucks over the last, however, was it decade now? God, too long, far too long
Yeah,
with the,
way too long.
if, there are many articles I've wrote where I'm just like, I'm really stretching to find a good thing a good thing to talk about here, but like I love writing, and that was why I got into this at the first place, was like because initially I wasn't even sure that I was going to go into writing, just because I was like, well, it's a very straight laced kind of thing. You focus very much on like the new, like the stat, not the stats, but like the newsy, like I think of the news,
Mhm.
I think of the newspaper, and just like that very straight laced, what you do with it, like what happened today kind of thing. Whereas there's so much more to it than that. And yeah, like fine, and like obviously you are a big inspiration for that. Like the people, like I'll obviously include like Wyatt Art in there, obviously. And like people like Down Goes Brown, Steve Dangle, like all those guys, like in different ways, like they found their own ways to cover a sport, and like different way, and that actually
And for
leads
me,
me.
it was like the curtain blog. Like the curtain
Yeah,
blog kind of
that's
showed me
right.
that, you can have some goofiness to it. Like, you can
Yeah.
have some fun writing about sports. It doesn't have to be, here's what the score was, who scored, this guy had an assist, and this is how this guy feels about it. He thinks that they gave 110%. Awesome. Like, it doesn't have to be that. You can have fun with it. I remember talking to Thomas Drance about this. He said that reading It To Bulis like kind of let him know, hey, I can have my own voice. I can write the way I want to. It doesn't have to be this like by the book sports journalism. He saw Passagewalis and he went, okay, I can have my own voice too, and I can write the way that I want to write about hockey. And so that was really cool to hear from him as well.
Oh man, yeah, like yeah, and for me, like that was very much it. Like I was always like, I wanted to make stuff that like not necessarily like just like, oh, I wanted to go into comedy per se, but like it was very much like this thing of I initially was thinking I was going to go into school for filmmaking for a while, like
Mhm.
that was something, or specifically writing for film. And because I liked writing funny jokes and skits, and I was like, oh, maybe one day I'll make a YouTube channel with really stupid, with like, oh, very funny sketch comedy, very original concept, especially in 2013 when that was half of YouTube. Uh, but then I saw like stuff like that where I was like, oh, I can actually like you can make people laugh while you're also being informative about about what's going on in a hockey game. And that was the other thing. I also noticed a lot of my skit ideas had, this is a hockey thing, hockey thing, hockey thing. Oh, I'm noticing a pattern. And yeah, like, and you can turn some weird stuff and you can turn like your own funny bits into like things that make hockey more enjoyable and make like the things you love more enjoyable. One question I did have here from Cody specifically, because he couldn't be here, that he had for you is like, we're already getting pretty low on time here because you've already dedicated a lot of time to doing this. He asked, what is harder to do, writing an album's worth of music or finding fresh new ways to describe simple hockey plays and game recaps?
Uh, that's a good question. Um,
Finally, right? Finally, a good question.
the first good question of the entire
Oh, thank
podcast. No.
God. Saves the whole show.
Um, no, it's interesting because like hockey writing is a job for me. So like it's literally like I have to think of something or else I nothing gets written and nothing I don't get paid, you know. Or rather I'm not under like I'm actually an employee now, so I get paid no matter what. But if I don't keep writing, I'll lose my job.
That's
So
how that works? Is that how that
yeah,
works? Oh,
something
man.
like that.
Lucky
But
me.
it's just like, when I'm watching a game and I have to come up with a new description of something, sometimes I just don't and I use an old description. It's like I use a joke that I've used before or do a slightly different spin on it or just make the worst possible joke. And it's okay because, you know, people kind of expect that when they read the I watched this game recaps that some of the jokes are going to be bad. Some of the jokes are just going to be references to things that they have no clue what they are. Some of them are going to hit you just right and you'll laugh. But when it comes to songwriting, like songwriting, I don't have to do it. So like I only do it when the feeling hits me right. When something comes into my mind and I have to write. Like it's a very different type of writing. I've got notebooks on hand that like if something pops into my head, a song lyric or something like that, I can just write it down and I can leave it and I don't have to keep going with that idea if it's not like really hitting my creativity. Like if I'm not feeling like writing a song, I don't, but if I'm not feeling like writing about hockey, I still do because that's my job. So, like, really writing a song is easier for me because I only do it when it's easy for me. It's not that it's like super easy. There's still challenges to it. It's still hard. Sometimes I have to push myself when I don't really feel like finishing a song. I go, no, I want to finish this because if I don't finish it now, this song will never be finished. But like for the most part, when I'm writing songs, it's just something that I love to do and it's a creative outlet and I just can do it much more easily than because I'm only doing it when I have that creative urge. And like with like I've got an album coming out next week, next Friday. It's going to be available for streaming and download. But like those were songs too that I wrote years and years ago. So it's like literally some of the early demos for those songs are 20 years old. That's how
Wow.
old some of the songs are. There were quite a few songs that did not make the cut. When I was like basically what happened is I looked back at these songs and I went that these songs that I wrote for my first band, which was called the Neverknown. I looked at these songs and went, yes, these are the songs that I want to make an album out of them, and some of the songs were bad and then they got kicked to the curb. Some of the songs like I recorded like demos for them and I thought okay maybe these will fit and they just ended up not quite fitting. But by the end of it I had 11 songs that felt still were relevant, still worked, even though some of them were literally 20 years old. Some of them are not quite that old, but like that, so that aspect of it, like I didn't have to write anything new necessarily. I did rewrite some parts. I did write some new guitar parts for different songs and things like that. But like I didn't really have to do too much new work to write those songs. So making the album from that that aspect of things, the songwriting aspect of things for making this album, I did that work like 2 decades ago. I didn't have to do any new work songwriting. It was just getting the songs into shape, recording them, doing all of that aspect of it. That took years because I have no free time. I have a I have a full-time job and I've got 3 kids and I've got time-consuming hobbies. So, you know, it's
Yeah,
tough to
like
find time.
yeah, life gets in the way, especially like with hobbies like that. And that's just that's a part of it, and that's why it's like it's so much more cool that you've gone out and you've done this and you've gotten like this opportunity to like put them out there, because this is something I obviously you've wanted to do for a really long time, even if it's like just for you, just to say you've done it and like to put out music that you're so proud of and that you've clearly put all your heart and soul and effort into. And I was talking about it with you before. Like I am somebody who has never had a musical bone in my body. I wish. I've always wanted to learn how to play the drums. I don't know whether it's my ADHD works great for drums. It does not work as well, I would say, for other instruments. So they're like, here's a bunch of very intricate things you have to do with your hands. Try and do them all at the same time. And God, I have always I find people who can make music, it's so impressive, and it's on like a whole other level, because you have to be able to, not only do you have to be a good writer, you also have to be able to know a melody, be able to find put melodies in your head in a puzzle that fits. In itself, it's a whole other language. So, and for you, how, when did you start with music, and how was it, when did you develop that, kind of start developing into that, oh, this was something that you really enjoyed doing and wanted it to, and was a passion of yours?
Well, I started with music really young. My parents noticed that I just kind of had an ear for music, or I just I enjoyed it a lot. They put me in these little kid music lessons, something called Kodai or something. I don't really remember, but I was very little. And then when I was 6, um we lived in Australia for a year. My dad was a high school teacher, and so it was this program where you did a teacher exchange. So one teacher and their family would move to another country, and they would take the house and job and car of another family that
And
moved.
name.
Well, and that family would then move to Canada, and they would take the same job that my dad had teaching at the high school, and live in our house and use our cars. And very odd when you think about it for too long. But so I had this great experience when I was 6, moving to Australia and living in Australia. And this house that we were in was entirely pink. Was very odd, and they had this pink piano. Even the piano was pink. So I I would hear songs on the radio, and I would go to the piano, and I would figure out what the melody was on the piano. And my parents saw this and went, "Oh, okay, we're gonna put him in piano lessons." So I took piano lessons for a decade or so, from age 6 to 16, and eventually picked up drums after that. And I didn't even start playing guitar until just before I went to university, really. So guitar was the last instrument I picked up, and it's the one that I enjoy the most. um, I wanted to write songs, and I found that I couldn't write songs on piano. It was very odd. I took Royal Conservatory. For those who know what Royal Conservatory is, it's very classical music oriented. I learned a lot about musical theory and all these things, but mostly I learned how to play classical pieces that other people had written, or more modern songs kind of in the same vein. But I learned how to read music and play music, and that was it. When it came to writing songs, I just would go to the piano, and I have no clue where to even start. And it just didn't work for me. I picked up a guitar, and I just played a few chords, and I went, "Oh my goodness, I can write a song on this." And it just kind of happened very quickly. Like I think the first day I picked up my mom's old classical guitar, the first day I learned how to tune it. Second day I learned how to play Breakfast at Tiffany's by Deep Blue Something, which is one of the worst band names of all time, by the way. Deep Blue Something. What in the world? Um, and the third day I wrote my first song, and it was terrible, and I don't even remember what it was, but I wrote my first song. I knew 3 chords, and I could write a song. And that was something that I was never able to do on piano. And so to be able to pick up a guitar and suddenly have this new world of songwriting opened up to me was pretty cool. I had written songs before that, just when I had a band in high school that never played a show. we
as we all do. Everyone
we
has
never
their
had
band,
we never even had a permanent drummer. But with myself and a few friends that played guitar and bass, I would write songs, but they were doing all the musical aspect of it. I was just figuring out what to sing over top of whatever the heck they were doing. And so to be able to write my own songs on guitar just opened up this new world for me, and it just went from there.
That's yeah, and that's yeah, again, I, as somebody who, literally, I'm somebody who, I had my best musical time as, literally, I had a band class in seventh grade that I was like, I got stuck on the giant bass drum that was 2 times my size that I had to literally bend backwards, like arch my back backwards to carry. Because I was the young guy, and I was the young kid, like the only like 7th grader out of like the other 8th grade drummers. So I got made to play that one, and then of course like learning hot cross buns on recorder. Like that's all I got. It's so cool that you're able to do that, and you're able to find that outlet. That is like it's such a like rare, cool gift to be able to like that you can able to like develop that, and it's super impressive. The one last question I had for you before we let you go here is if you had to pick I'm obviously all these songs are almost like are got to be like kids to you essentially, right? Like where they're all your baby, that you've put a lot of time and effort into developing them and making them into what they are. Do you on this album, do you have a favorite?
Oh man. That's
Is that
tough.
too loaded a question? If it's too loaded a question, I get it.
Like all of them I like for different reasons, and like none of them would have made it onto the album if I didn't if I didn't like them. But like so there's a song called Wrong About You on there, and I have a real soft spot for that song because I wrote it. It's one of the few like love songs that I've written for my wife. So I wrote it while we were dating, and it was in a long distance relationship. Like she was I think at the time that I wrote this, she was literally in another time zone. She for work, she was off selling books to raise money to get money to go to college, and so I wrote this song about like about this long distance relationship, and about how much I was missing her, and so that one is one that I have a real soft spot for. And the chorus is literally just like, I don't want to be wrong about you, and so like that's kind of one that I still, that's probably my favorite, but I don't know, I still really like We're All Going to Die, because that's just, I mean, that just speaks truth into the world. We're all going to die.
I mean, God, more than ever, like yes, the mask mandate is officially gone today, but like, oh, I don't know about that. I'm gonna be wearing my mask still for a lot of places for a while.
I'm gonna keep it on for a little while.
Yeah, especially like on transit. I might honestly
Oh,
just
gosh.
go like transit, like places like the transit, the grocery store, like those kinds of things. I honestly might just keep going with it for like a few years. Like it's just kind of like I'm comfortable with it now. Like it's just in places like when you're at a restaurant, I'm like, okay, I do want to take it off now.
I mean, it amazes me that I used to like ride the bus without a mask on. Now that I
God,
think about it,
yeah,
it's
like
like no offense to people that ride the bus. I ride the bus.
yeah.
I don't think other people would want to breathe any germs that I might be coughing out into the air. Who knows?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I'll probably be keeping the mask on the bus at the very least for quite a while.
Probably, and that song will pair well with that. Will pair well with it. Daniel, it has been awesome having you on the show. There are so many more things, honestly. I would love to ask you about, but I've already taken up enough of your day as is. I know you got your own stuff to do. There's a game tonight that you probably have to go to. And on the very rare chance that someone listening to this has never heard of you and wants to find your work, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at It To Bulis. You can find me at VancouverisAwesome.com, or you can go to passittobulis.com. You can find me on Instagram, never posting, at Passitobulis. You can find me on TikTok, very seldomly posting, at Passitobulis. Mostly just at Passitobulis. if you look up Passitobulis, that's Bulis, Bulis. You can find me pretty much anywhere.
There we go. Perfect. I of course am Lachlan Irvin. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Lock in the Crease. You can find my writing work at CanucksArmy.com. I write there pretty frequently. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use. Check out our YouTube channel. You can find the whole video episode of this in full there. And Cody's not here today, but if he were, he'd tell you to go check out ahlnucksharvest.com, where he does all his much needed work on the Abbotsford Canucks and the advanced stats and their recapping those games. And you can follow him on Twitter at Cody Sievertson. And make sure to check out patreon.com/CreaseCast. $1 and $5 tiers. We do bonus content and stuff for the $5 tiers. A little bit more actually coming out these days from me. Until next time, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you on Monday. Bye.